Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Shaniqua Levin, and I am the secretary for the Gwinnett NAACP, and I am here representing President Edward Paul, who could not be with us today, but we are moving forward with our candidate forum, and we're excited to bring this to you so that way you can learn where candidates stand on the issues before going to the polls on election day and making your decision. We have questions that we will be asking the candidates. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions into the chat, and then we will share those with the candidates as well towards the end session of our questions. Just to let you know about a couple of things we are excited to invite you to with the NAACP. We have our 2K Walk to the Polls. It's being co-hosted with the New Jerusalem Baptist Church Political Action Ministry. And that event is on Saturday, October 26th at 11 a.m. It's going to begin on the New Jerusalem Baptist Church, which is on Krogan Street in Lawrenceville. And you can also check our social media pages for that as well. Now, if you don't want to walk, that's okay. We're also going to have a motorcade. So you can bring your car, and we're actually going to have a cash prize for whoever's car is decorated the best. And we will also have supplies there to decorate your car. Now, we are a nonpartisan organization, so you have to remember that your messages on your car or anything that you're walking with cannot have any particular candidate's name on it. But you're still welcome to get creative, so please join us. We'll walk from the church. Be sure to bring some good walking shoes. And then if you want to bring your car, just remember to get involved with decorating it, because that should be really fun and exciting. Our second event that we have coming up will be the following day, Sunday, October 27th, and that is also a Souls to the Poll event. And we'll be having a Get Out the Vote event where we'll have lots of fun, music, and food. And that's from 1 to 6 o'clock, and it's going to be at George Pierce Park. So let's come together and make sure that we are being heard this election season. We will also be having a voter watch party on election day. So save the date. On election day, after you cast your ballot, come out with us. Let's party. Let's watch and see who's going to win this thing. Let's have some conversation, and let's network with one another. More details about that event will be coming out soon. So if you have not joined the NAACP email list, please do so. Also, like our Instagram and Facebook pages, so that way you can stay up to date with the activities happening with your Gwinnett NAACP chapter. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Therese. Dr. Therese is from the top ladies of distinction, and she will be our moderator for tonight's forum. Thank you, Dr. Therese, for being here. Your microphone is on mute.
There you are. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
So just to tell you a little bit, like Top Ladies of Distinction, much like the Gwinnett branch of the NAACP, is a nonpartisan organization. It's a ladies humanitarian organization that has been around since for 60 years now. I am in the North Atlanta chapter. We were chartered on June 12, 2018. And we have nearly 100 ladies who are working very hard in the community to be of service. So we're excited to be here and do our part to support the Gwinnett chapter, or the Gwinnett branch of the NAACP, for this nonpartisan candidate forum.
Great, and thank you again for co-hosting this. So let's introduce our candidates.
Sure. All right. So first, we have Ashwin Rammaswami. He is running for state Senate candidate in District 48, representing Sugar Hill. Would you like to tell us anything about you and your platform, sir?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Therese, for having me here at the candidate forum. My name is Ashwin Rammaswami, and I'm running for state Senate in District 48. So it includes parts of North Gwinnett, so Sugar Hill, Swanee, Beaufort. It also goes all the way to South Forsyth, and finally, large parts of Johns Creek and a bit of Alpharetta as well. I was born and raised in Johns Creek, and I'm running to represent the community where I grew up in. I'm the son of immigrants from South India who came to the United States because they saw the potential and opportunity that our country offers. And that's what led me to decide that I wanted to actually take the skills I learned and give back. My own background is in computer science and law. So growing up here, um, after I grew up here, I did my undergrad in computer science. I was over in the Bay at Stanford, and I did a law degree at Georgetown. And I decided pretty early on that I wanted to do public service because there's not enough people with those kinds of skill sets working in public service. So I used to work in the federal government at the Federal Cybersecurity Agency called CISA on election security in 2020. And that's what led me to further realize that public service is a great opportunity to give back to the community. Ultimately, I decided to come back home and run here because there's so many issues here, and we can't wait because these issues uh, um, are so serious. Whether it's, oh, do I have a minute? So my top three issues are gun safety, protecting reproductive rights, protecting our right to vote, and having honest young leadership in office, as opposed to my opponent who's facing a criminal indictment for trying to overturn our election results in 2020. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for sharing that with us. Well, we know that you're running for the state candidate, a state Senate candidate, and that part of your responsibilities as a senator would be to propose new legislation, drafting amendment bills, and just oversight of federal budget, things like that. But will you tell us anything that we may have missed about what, or something that we might not know about what you would be doing in that role?
So one important piece of being a state senator, being a state legislator, is not just passing bills, but it's constituent services. So typically your state senator or state representative will have an office, and any constituent can go and contact them if you have an issue with the state government, you have a question on how to do X, Y, and Z, or if you even need to get connected to your federal representative or something in that way. So that's a really important piece of the job, is just being there and being accessible so people have someone they can talk to help them navigate the confusing pieces of government as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so next we have our state candidate for State House Representative, Laura Murvartian, and she is representing District 48, and that is around Peachtree Corners. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. So yes, Peachtree Corners is a piece that is a part of Gwinnett. I also have Johns Creek, Alpharetta, and Roswell. But Laura Murvartian, I am a business executive, a small business owner, nonprofit leader, and proud immigrant. I come from a family of factory workers. My parents worked in the chicken and meat processing plants. I worked in the chicken processing plant when I was in high school as well. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I was fortunate to receive the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which allowed me to complete my master's in public policy with a focus on international economics at the University of Michigan. My first job out of graduate school was at the Federal Reserve Bank. I then moved into the corporate space. I was the director of telecommunications at Turner Broadcasting, and also senior director and negotiator at Equifax, where I negotiated multi-million-dollar data deals in Mexico, US, and Canada. I'm also started my own business. I bought the rights to the state of Georgia for a wine franchise. I launched 6 wine franchises that contributed more than $7 million to the Georgia economy. And I've started 2 nonprofits that are still operating today. I've served my community for decades. I have been a volunteer and board member at multiple nonprofits in the state of Georgia, including a trustee of the Woodruff Arts Center and board member at Hands on Atlanta. My priorities, similar to Ashwin's, common sense gun laws, reproductive rights, access to health care, and of course, the environment as well.
It sounds like both of you really have political stances that coincide with some of the concerns of the community. So we hope we get some really good questions tonight. Just one more question. So I know that the House of Representatives in Georgia is the larger of the two chambers of the General Assembly. And I know some of what you do, and I know that you address state priorities like agriculture, development of tax policy. But is there anything else you'd like to tell us about what a state representative does?
Yes. So obviously the number one responsibility we have is to pass the budget. That really is all that we are legally bound to do. But of course, we invest a lot of, the legislature spends a lot of time in passing bills and laws. But I think it is, Ashwin talked about constituent services. So yes, that is a big part of it. But I also hope to use my platform that you have as a state legislator to help my community and other communities that are underrepresented across the state of Georgia. So I think it is what you do with your platform that you can really multiply the good that you can do once you're elected into office, and to recruit more people to run. I think that's part of our job. Let's get more people to run. We have some seats where we don't have a Democrat. Well, again, I'm part of the Democratic Party, so I will be working on that as well.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure some of this might be information that the viewers already know, and some of it might be brand new information. So it's good to kind of recalibrate us and inform us. Thank you. So if you'd like, we can start and we can get into the questions. And candidate Rammaswami, I would like to start with you, if that's okay. As a state senator, what specific measures would you support or propose to address gun violence in Georgia, particularly concerning issues like background checks, concealed carry laws, or restrictions on assault weapons?
So the first priority, which I have, is really ensuring that we can get legislation that already has bipartisan support past the finish line. So my top priority initially would be actually safe storage laws. These would ensure that people, when they're keeping guns unattended, they're keeping them locked up so that someone else can't accidentally use them who shouldn't be using those guns. And that's actually passed the House with bipartisan support. Needs a bit more votes in the Senate to make that a reality. The second priority is expanded background checks. Just like when you want to drive a car, you have to get a license, take a driving test. There should be similar kind of restrictions to ensure that the right people are responsible gun owners are the ones able to use guns. And the final thing I want to focus on is these red flag laws. The idea that if someone is flagged to be a danger, maybe because they're undergoing mental health crisis or because they've been committing domestic abuse, they should not be able to use a weapon in that case. And I think in the long run, we do need to take a look at ensuring that weapons of war, which are not needed in the normal civilian context, should not be bought and sold by individuals here, because they're just not needed. They just create risk.
Right. Okay. Now we're candidate Murvartian, we're going to move to you with the same question. I'll repeat it just for context sake. As a state representative, what specific measures would you support or propose to address gun violence in Georgia, particularly concerning issues like background checks, concealed carry laws, and restrictions on assault weapons?
Yeah, so for me, the way that I'm approaching this topic is really just to focus on keeping guns away from children. The number one killer of children in the country and in Georgia are guns. So I feel that we live in the state of Georgia. This is a very contentious topic. I want to make sure that we can set ourselves up for success. So I have two things that I want to work on, and that is the safe storage laws. We currently don't have that in place in Georgia. The only thing that passed in the House was a $300 credit if you actually bought a gun safe or accessories, and then it did not pass the Senate. So would love to focus on safe storage laws. The other piece is universal background checks. Georgia does not require background checks. The federal government does, and so those are taking place if you purchase a weapon at an official retailer. Other than that, we do not require background checks. We often hear that law-abiding citizens should have the right to carry guns, and I always say, well, how do we know that they're law-abiding citizens when we're not doing background checks, when we don't have universal background checks? Also, about 30% of the suicides that take place in our youth population are done with guns. A youth is more likely to commit suicide when there is a gun at home. I'm okay with people having guns at home. I think we have to protect ourselves. We just need to store them properly so that we can keep them away from children.
That's good. So I think what I hear both of you saying is that you're not looking to take away rights. You're just looking to protect or add other layers of protection in when it comes to acquiring guns, and also putting in some accountability measures there for people who do own guns. Am I correct? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. So candidate Murvartian, we're going to go to you with the next question. Georgia has not fully expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, leaving many residents without affordable health care. Do you support Medicaid expansion? If not, what alternative solutions do you propose to improve health care across low-income Georgians?
I absolutely, I absolutely support Medicaid expansion. It is beyond me why we haven't done that in Georgia. Well, so Georgia is third in the number of uninsured that we have in our state. 12.5% of our population does not have health insurance. It's just not affordable for our population, 12.5%. As you might know, the Governor Kemp proposed his own version of expanded Medicaid. It's called Pathways. They've only signed up 4,000 people. They already reached their 1-year anniversary with the program. They've only signed 4,000 people. They were expecting to sign about 100,000 individuals. If we expand Medicaid, we are only one of 10 states that has not expanded Medicaid through the federal program. If we expand Medicaid, we will give access to insurance to about 400,000 Georgians. So I'm all for it. I don't think we're going to get that while Kemp is in office. So I think, by the way, right now, the Republicans have a trifecta. They have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the government, the governors, and they've had that for 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Rammaswami, we have the same question for you, and I'll repeat it for context's sake. Georgia's not fully expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, leaving many residents without access to affordable health care. Do you support Medicaid expansion? If not, what alternative solutions do you propose to improve health care access to low-income Georgians?
I strongly support Medicaid expansion as well. It not only makes moral sense to ensure that low-income Georgians are able to see a doctor and have the healthcare they need, it makes fiscal sense because we're currently leaving billions of dollars off the table, taxpayer money, which is going to the federal government, but not being invested back in our communities. And it's much cheaper, honestly, for people to be able to have preventative care by going to doctor's appointments, as opposed to their first time being in a medical setting to be at the ER when their condition gets so bad that it requires an emergency treatment. So that's really why I support Medicaid expansion. It's not only going to increase healthcare for a lot of folks, it's going to lower healthcare costs for everyone because we're going to be spending less from Georgians' own pockets on healthcare costs in general. It's also going to increase a lot of the resources available for Georgians with disabilities, which is an issue I'm especially passionate about. And I know that Medicaid expansion can create more of those opportunities. And the final thing here is that Medicaid expansion can also help us stem the crisis that we have in Georgia, where we have hospitals across the state, particularly in rural areas, in closing because they can't afford to keep operating. Having this additional source of funding, we still have access to healthcare for the folks across the state.
Sounds good. I hear both of you talking about it being fiscally responsible to expand Medicaid, not just because people need the care, but because we want to make sure that we are being fiduciarily responsible when it comes to the monies that the taxpayers are already paying in. So it sounds like there's a lot of cohesion here where that is concerned as well. So I will pose the next question to candidate Murvartian. Georgia currently has one of the lowest minimum wage rates in our country. Do you believe that the state should raise the minimum wage? And if so, to what level? How would you address concerns from small businesses about political impact and employment, or unemployment, I should say?
Yeah, so that is not increasing the minimum wage is not something that I'm going to be. I guess I would prefer to focus on making sure that we have higher paying jobs and that we are creating a competitive environment. We have a low unemployment rate right now in Georgia. So I think the small businesses should pay the appropriate wage to make sure that they're getting the type of workforce that they need. As a small business owner, and when I worked with small business owners, I think imposing an increase in the minimum wage to a lot of people are talking about, say, $15. I think that would be difficult for some of our small businesses. So I think doing it universally across the board, especially for our state, I think would be a challenge. I'm, of course, an advocate for labor rights, an advocate for the right pay, but not through a forced increase in minimum wage at this time.
Okay. Same question for you. Would you like me to repeat it, candidate Rammaswami?
I'm good. I'm happy to answer it. So,
Okay.
yeah. So from my perspective, I mean, ultimately, every worker deserves the right to a livable wage in which they are able to afford what they need. They shouldn't have to work multiple full-time jobs in order to make a living. So the minimum wage needs to be a livable wage. It needs to be indexed to inflation. And I think that's part of the issues we're seeing here, where it's set to a particular number that never changes based on the realities. I do also understand that like any change in minimum wage needs to be coupled with additional work so that small businesses can continue to hire and have workers, because there is that reality, right, where the businesses also need to have the right incentives, the right kinds of investment, the right talent pool, so they can really hire the folks they need. And I think the other piece that often isn't discussed here is Georgia still has sub minimum wage, meaning that workers with disabilities are actually able to be paid far, far below even the Georgia minimum wage. And that's something I completely support abolishing, because no one with a disability should be paid less than a livable wage just because of who they are.
Right.
And just really quickly, I wanted to add in there. Representative candidate, state representative candidate, Murvartian, if you're not in support of an increase in minimum wage, but you are in support of a fair wages, how would you go about making sure employers give fair wages if it's not setting for a standardized wage?
Yeah, so I think for me, it is one, making sure that I would like to focus on having higher paying jobs, period, right? So that we are bringing more of those jobs into our state. But I think forcing an increase, especially to a livable wage in Georgia, I mean, $15, sometimes people talk about $15 as being a livable wage. You actually probably need more than that. I would not be a proponent of having small businesses or requiring them to pay $15 per hour as a minimum wage. That is going to be very difficult for a lot of small businesses. I think if we focus on making sure the small businesses can achieve a certain level of success, it's complicated. But I know that just forcing that $15 on small businesses, it will have repercussions that I'm not comfortable with.
Thank you. Turn it back over to you, Dr. Therese.
Thank you. So just an important note to the viewers, if you want more information on candidate Murvartian, you can visit her website at www.lauramurvartian.com. And also, if candidate Rammaswami has a website as well, and it's ashwinforgeorgia.com, I believe. Did I get that right? .com, yes. So please log on to those websites if you'd like more information about them professionally and about their platform. Also, viewers, please utilize the chat to ask questions of the candidates, because we have a very, very rare opportunity to have their ear here and have them respond to your questions. So we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your questions, and I'm sure they are more than prepared and ready to answer those. So our next question would be posed to candidate Rammaswami. Your opponent, the current Senator Sean Steele's involvement as an alternate elector in the 2020 election controversy, right? With
That's
respect to that, how do you believe that this impacts his ability to serve with integrity in a position of public trust? And what steps would you take to ensure transparency and trust if you were elected?
a fundamental role of public officials in our democracy is respecting the sacred institutions, particularly the institution of the vote. When Sean Steele played his part in that whole enterprise in 2020 to try to switch the electoral votes from Biden to Trump, he undermined the votes of every single voter in our district, whether they're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. It shows a major a major problem, but it's also a major lack of judgment, because there were folks within his own party, Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, who did not go along with the big lie, who stood up and said, I'm going to follow the law. But Sean Steele didn't do that. And that ultimately makes him unfit for office, because if you can't trust that he's going to uphold the system and accept the results of an election, how can you trust he's going to tell the truth at all? You just can't trust Sean Steele. And that's ultimately why I decided to run, because I've worked with both Democrats and Republicans on election security, folks who care about our right to vote. I know how to get things done, and I know how to serve our people with integrity, and that's what I intend to do.
Okay. Do you believe that there's anything you can do personally as far as your campaign and your potential tenure in the Senate to ensure transparency and trust if you're elected?
I think the first step is kicking out people like Sean Steele is the first step in ensuring transparency and trust. But in terms of concrete policy reform, there's a lot of things we can do, such as providing more funding to county election offices so that they can better inform the public about how votes are counted, how those things work, ensuring that Secretary of State's office and local officials have the right talent in cybersecurity and election security, transparency, recounts, and just ensuring that any of the reforms we do for elections should be based on the science and based on experts, not just based on political hunches.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Murvartian, your opponent, State Representative Scott Hilton, supported the Heartbeat Bill, which significantly restricts access to abortion services. What do you view this legislation's impact? How do you view this legislation's impact on women's reproductive rights in Georgia? And what steps would you take to protect those rights, if any?
Oh, I mean, the Heart bill in Georgia is one of the most strict bills in the country. It has hurt women. It has hurt our economy. As many of you know, women have died as a result of this bill. So I absolutely want to make sure that we repeal this bill, and that we go back to the rights that women had, that families had prior to this going into effect. My opponent believes that life begins at conception. He does not believe in abortion under any circumstances, and he is endorsed by organizations that would do away with the exceptions that we have right now, which are for rape and incest. Also, my opponent did a resolution in IVF, which just I don't understand. If you believe that life begins in conception, how you can be in support of IVF. So I think he's sending very mixed messages, and I don't trust his resolution on IVF. I think he is going to go after women's reproductive rights, including IVF.
Okay, my next question is for you as well, candidate Murvartian. What housing costs, with housing costs continuing to rise in Georgia, particularly in urban areas, what steps would you take as a legislator to promote development of affordable housing and to prevent displacement of long-term residents?
Yeah. So with this issue, two things that I would focus on is one, about 60% of the homes under $500,000 in the metro area are owned by corporations. I think we need to legislate that. I think we need to limit that. Corporations come and buy these homes and then they rent them. And so that decreases the supply of housing that we have in the metro area. So we definitely need to regulate that. So that would be one area. The other area is making sure that we have walkable communities, higher density type of home options, so that we can basically, again, have housing at different levels of prices. And so that we can, one, not have so much of the urban sprawl that we have in Georgia, which also will help in our transportation and getting communities to be more connected. And we do always have to have, every time you have a development where you have a certain set of units that are for our workforce, for our nurses, teachers, police officers. We need to make sure that our workforce has affordable living within the areas in which they work.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I've heard people saying that the housing costs are rising at a rate that's faster than they are getting cost of living increases. So this is a very important issue for Georgians, especially in the greater Atlanta area, where a lot of people are being displaced because of that. So thank you for addressing that. And again, viewers, if you have any questions, specific questions, please put those in the chat and we will ask those questions towards the end. Candidate Ramaswamy, with housing costs continuing to rise in Georgia, same question, particularly in the urban areas, what steps would you take as a legislator to promote development of affordable housing and prevent displacement of long-term residents? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Right. So this is a huge issue, especially in the suburbs as well. In my district, the median house price is around $500,000, which is really hard, first of all, for young people who just graduated to buy a house here. So they often leave. But it's also hard for long-term residents. A lot of them are downsizing, as you mentioned, right? The housing prices are increasing far faster than wage growth. So what we have to do is ultimately attack the root cause of this problem, which is we're not building enough housing. And when you build housing, you build it in the right kind of way. You build it in a way which rather than we have to preserve the character of our community. You have to keep the natural beauty of our environment, but just be a bit smarter in what we do. So, for example, changing zoning laws, which require very large minimum parking lot sizes just to build a house, to build buildings and those kinds of developments, making it easier to create mixed use developments that have both houses and apartments, but also shops people can live nearby. And finally, improving and expanding public transit. There are many places in the world where you've seen this idea of transit-oriented development, where you're able to take cars off the streets and you're able to actually have more people live in a place, but still keep the character where it's a safe and thriving community.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, both candidates. The next question is going to be for you, candidate Ramaswamy, and it's in reference to Senate Bill 189. Senate Bill 189 allows for unlimited voter challenges, which some could argue would lead to mass voter suppression. What do you view this law's impact, or how do you view this law's impact on voters, particularly in marginalized communities? And what steps would you take to ensure that the voters' rights are protected?
So one thing to realize is everyone believes in the right and the right of people to actually have their voice heard and vote. The problem is there have been so many instances where folks, in the name of election security, are actually making it much, much harder for people to vote. And really, this idea of mass voter challenges is just one example of that. Like, we all agree that voter rolls should be clean. We don't want people voting who shouldn't be voting. But if you look at the facts, there's so little cases of actual voter fraud. And there's so many cases of people being disenfranchised because they got an address change or a name doesn't match or whatever else happens in the list. So again, we have to have these reforms have to be done based on experts and based on fact and based on the science, not based on hunches and attempts to disenfranchise large numbers of people. So we have to ensure that we have a system where, yes, voter challenges can happen, but you shouldn't have a disproportionate system where a handful of activists can challenge tens of thousands or even larger number of voters at the same time. It drains resources, taxpayer money, and it ultimately just disenfranchises our voters.
Thank you. Candidate Murvartian, your opponent, the current Senate or State Representative Scott Hilton, has supported bills that divert funding from public schools to private institutions. How do you believe this will affect public education in Georgia, and what do you think you would do differently?
Oh, I would get rid of this program immediately. The vouchers, first of all, you can only use a voucher if you're in a failing school, which then essentially takes the money that would be invested in that school system and it takes it from our public to a private institution. I feel that that means we are running away from the problem. We are leaving the children behind whose parents don't have the ability to send them to a public school or another option, and we're leaving them behind. And it is our responsibility as legislators to make sure that we have a thriving, a well-funded school system. Instead of investing $150 million, which is what the voucher program is expected to be, it's capped at about 1% of what the CBE formula is. So it's about 140 million, 150 million. Let's make sure that we are paying teachers where they need to be paid. Our teacher pay is under the national average, and our starting teacher pay is like 30th in the country.
Okay. Let's see. Candidate Murvartian, one more question for you. What's your position on the legalization of cannabis in Georgia?
I'm in agreement with the legalization of marijuana. I think Georgia has one of the highest incarceration rates, especially when you compare it to our population. And I think we need to decriminalize this. Now, I do think that cannabis can cause harm to young people. So we've got to make sure that we are regulating it to make sure that our younger population doesn't have access to it. But I am all for the legalization of marijuana if again, done properly, and that we make sure that we're educating our youth on the impacts. But it is something that should be decriminalized. My opponent, when he was asked this question, he answered that, well, in other states, cannabis sales did not bring enough taxes. That should not be the measure as to whether one has the right to do something. We should not measure, for example, women's reproductive rights. If you're measuring based on how many taxes that we pay, women, contribute a heck of a lot in taxes. Anyway, that's just the wrong way to look at any rights. How much money am I going to bring in by giving you a right?
Understandable. Now, you brought up other states, so I'll just ask this follow-up question. Do you think, is there another state that you've observed and you would say that I can look at the model for what they are doing with cannabis and say we can definitely take some things that they're doing right and implement them here in Georgia? And if you have identified a state like that, can you tell us what kinds of things that you see other states doing correctly?
I have not studied the issue to that degree to see what best practices would be, but obviously that is something I would do once in office and once we have that proposal on the table, absolutely. But one of the issues with legalizing cannabis is that it's not legal at the federal government. So the way you handle money is very complicated. You can't use certain transactions that we take for granted in many other businesses. So I think we also need to advocate for changes at the federal level that will make it safer for the businesses to actually engage in this new business.
Thank you for sharing. Same question for you, candidate Rammaswami. What is your position on the legalization of cannabis in Georgia?
So my position is that the Georgians should decide. So I would 100% support a referendum in Georgia, and the way that would work is the House, the Senate would pass that and put it to the vote of voters, and that's what happened in many other states where voters have had a chance to decide whether they're ready for that or not.
Okay, and just a follow-up for you, sir.
Yeah.
If cannabis were legalized in the state of Georgia, how would you envision regulating it to ensure public safety, economic benefits, and even restorative justice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I would say, if we're to regulate it, just like any other industry, ensuring that the point of regulation is to protect the public. So we want to ensure that the citizens of Georgia are able to partake in the benefits, but we want to discourage the creation of black markets. We want to ensure that folks who might be particularly vulnerable, for example, children, are fully protected from the harms, and that everyone is really educated as well. We want to ensure that we don't want a similar thing to happen as what tobacco companies with deceptive advertising. We want to ensure that the companies that are selling these products are fully honest and candid about what's in them and the side effects as well.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Murvartian, given Georgia's high maternal mortality rate, what strategies do you propose to improve maternal health care access and outcomes, particularly for underserved populations?
Well, we've already talked about one is expansion of Medicaid to begin with, right? You've got to have that preventative health. You've got to make sure that you that people have health insurance so they can get the care they need, which then also will help us sustain our hospitals, our clinics. We know that we've had hospitals that have closed in Georgia. We know that I think 50% of our counties only do not have an OBGYN. And so again, if we give people access to insurance, which then will lower everybody else's insurance rates as well, we can start by having a stronger healthcare system in Georgia. Our healthcare in Georgia is in a crisis. We have a high infant mortality rate, high maternal mortality rate. Half of the rural counties do not have a pediatrician. So we're in a crisis, and we have a $16 billion surplus right now in our state. And we have these federal dollars that we're not using. So
let's put them to use.
Exactly. Let's save some lives.
Right. Candidate Rammaswami, we have the same question for you. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so given Georgia's high maternal mortality rate, what strategies would you propose to improve maternal health care across access and with respect to outcomes, particularly for underserved populations?
So number one is Medicaid expansion. We've talked enough about this, how that would improve and increase access to healthcare. Number two is reversing our abortion ban to ensure that mothers can get the life-saving care which they may need. And number three is eliminating unnecessary taxes. So Georgia, we have the tampon tax, for example, and sales tax on women's menstrual products, which absolutely makes it much harder for poorer Americans to get the healthcare that they need. And those are the kinds of things that which I would advocate for. And I think the final thing here is just ensuring that we are supporting folks in underserved and particularly rural communities. So to combat things like the crisis for rural hospitals closing, we should create more incentives for doctors to be able to practice in those kinds of areas, ensuring that we increase the supply of doctors and talent, so that if no matter where you are in Georgia, you should be able to get the healthcare you need without having to drive several hours just to find a competent doctor has the resources to help you.
Okay, thank you. So, candidate Rammaswami, state employees who have been employed with the state for at least 6 months are eligible for up to 3 weeks for paid leave to bond with a child who joins their family through birth, adoption, or foster care placement. And this applies to an employee of any gender. This is not a right that's extended just by state law to all Georgians. So do you plan on making this a reality for all Georgians?
So this is something I'll definitely look into. I think there's a question about the budget realities and ensuring that we're still allowing, say, small businesses to continue to innovate. But I would support additional efforts towards doing this. Ultimately, Georgia does have $11 billion budget surplus, and if we're not investing back in our communities and back in our workers, what else are we investing it on? And there's also a question about the companies, the entities which are most well-resourced to do this. For example, the large corporations should perhaps be doing this first to set an example and taking on that burden so that we are able to ensure that all Georgians and all workers have the paid leave that they need. And, I think ultimately what I tell folks who are in business is supporting your workers will also improve your business, because when your workers are happy and they're healthy, you're going to have better outcomes as well. And that's really the goal through which I've approached this campaign and I've approached how to do business.
Thank you. Candidate Murvartian, we have the same question for you. Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so state employees, Georgia state employees that have been employed with the state for at least 6 months have the right, or they are eligible to receive up to 3 weeks off of paid parental leave to bond with a child who has joined their family either by birth, foster care placement, or adoption. And this applies to an employee of any gender. This is not a right, however, that is afforded to every Georgian. So we're wondering if you can talk to us about whether or not you think that this is something that you could advocate for, and do you plan on making this, or whether or not you plan on making this a reality for all Georgians?
First of all, I think that law actually increased it from 3 weeks to 6 weeks. I know that actually applies now to teachers. And by the way, the Republicans are very proud of that. And I'm like, really? You're proud of just 3 weeks to 6 weeks? 3 weeks was ridiculous for a state employee, frankly. That should not be the measure of whether that is an appropriate leave. Now, there are certain businesses that don't offer benefits like PTO, right? If you're an hourly employee at a small, again, mom and pop type of retail shop, and many of those, don't offer a type of PTO or some of these other benefits. But once you reach a certain level of revenue threshold, then 6 weeks should be the minimum. And you can do it in a number of ways. Again, it is a cost to the business. But you can also do it with, you could also take unpaid, part of it be unpaid leave, but you're still protecting your job. And that should be an option.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It looks like just listening to all of your answers about all these questions that spanned so many topics, it sounds like both of you are candidates who prefer to target the cause of a problem or go grassroots with your solution rather than tackling from the top. And I also get from you that you're very consistent in that whatever decisions you make, you want them to be beneficial, not just for your constituents within your party, but for the all of the Georgians that you represent. So thank you for taking those stances, and thank you for your commitment to serving our community. Right now, it looks like we have at least one question in the chat, and I'm going to turn this over so we can get that question answered. And please, if you any of the viewers have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. You don't get many opportunities like this to have a candidate's ear.
All right, so one of the questions coming in the chat is, since both of you are strong supporters of common sense gun reform, are there specific measures and or policies that you plan to propose to enhance gun safety within our schools? Candidate Rammaswami, please start first.
Sure thing. So the first issue, which I briefly mentioned a little bit before, was around safe storage. And this is something which can measurably make an impact, because a lot of gun violence happens when you have little kids accidentally picking up a gun which is left around by an adult in the house, and they accidentally shoot themselves, they shoot someone else, or they bring it out to somewhere else and cause harm. So that's one thing which I would strongly support in terms of enhancing gun safety. And I think the last thing I'll also say is, I think a lot of folks, when you're talking about school safety, they talk about mental health. And I would say I also very strongly support mental health reform, additional hiring of counselors in schools, because currently they're understaffed, those kinds of resources. I just think it's a both and as opposed to an either or. We should both ensure that those who shouldn't have guns should not have access to it. And we can also ensure that students have the mental health support they need, so people who are going through a crisis can get the counseling and care they need. So that way there's no danger to anyone at all.
Okay. Same question for you. Since both of you are strong supporters of common sense gun reform, are there specific measurements or policies that you would plan to introduce to enhance gun safety within our schools?
Yeah, within our, I'm going to echo the mental health, investment in mental health, and of course, guns, safe gun storage laws that prevent people from bringing guns to schools. But the reality is that we have, that we have guns everywhere. So we need to have a hotline where people can send in tips about anyone who has talked about violence in schools. We need to make sure that the various law enforcement departments have access to this information. We know that there was a young man who had made a threat, I think, in one school, or had problems in one school, but then when he went to the other school, the school did not know his background. So we need to make sure that we are sharing information across law enforcement agencies, across schools, so that we can be more alert when a problem might be brewing, or when someone needs access to mental health. In the meantime, we need to make sure that our schools, the technology that the school in Binder had, we need to make sure that all of our schools have that.
Thank you. There's one more question in the chat. So we will get to that one question, and then we will give you all about a minute or so to do final thoughts. So this last question, we will start with you, candidates Murvartian. And this question is, the VA system in Georgia has a long-standing reputation for being both inaccessible and overly complicated for veterans. What strategies do you propose to address these barriers and ensure that they have access to the care they require?
Money, 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 money. I mean, come on, we've all heard that where you spend your money shows what your priorities are. We need to make sure that our veterans are taken care of. Let's put money so that they have somebody who is going to walk them through the complicated process. I was actually having this conversation at breakfast this morning with a constituent, with a voter whose father is a veteran. And he's been able to navigate the system successfully, but it is complicated. And not everyone has those resources, the skill set, whatever it might be, the support system to navigate that effectively. Let's make sure that we have people who can walk our veterans through that complicated process. And let's invest in making sure that we are offering those individuals who can help them navigate through the system, and making sure that we just have more employees and more access to resources for our veterans.
Thank you. And same question for you, candidate Rammaswami. The VA system in Georgia has a longstanding reputation for being both inaccessible and overly complicated for veterans. What strategies do you propose to address these barriers and ensure that they have access to the care they require?
So I agree, money is really important. The other piece here is actually better technology and better user experience. And the reason I'm saying this is because I used to work closely with a lot of the software engineers who started recently working in the federal government to ensure that the Department of Veterans Affairs at the federal level was actually more accessible, easier for veterans to use. And these folks, the U.S. Digital Service, did a lot of good work just taking websites that were really, really complicated to use, complicated to navigate, and actually understanding what does a typical user look like, what's their flow, how do you ensure that the information is at their fingertips. And I think we should do the exact same thing at the state level. In Georgia, we should also do the same thing here, where we also have people who understand technology and can improve the experience. So that way, where the money is going is also the most well spent as well.
Thank you. There is one more question in the chat, but I will save that for you, candidate Murvartian. And right now what we'll do is we will give candidate Rammaswami an opportunity to share some final thoughts with us, because we do know you have to leave promptly, well, now.
Yes, definitely. So I would just say thank you for the opportunity to address you all today. Ultimately, the reason I'm running for office is because I want to give back to my community. And I just realized that the folks in office are not only not focusing on these major, major issues, they're actively undermining the right to vote. And I think ultimately elections are about values and trusts. and about who can you trust to basically do well for the community. And I hope that this election isn't just about me. It's about inspiring dozens of people just like me, young people who grew up in a community, to come back home and actually be a guide and serve their community back. I think that's ultimately the best way in which we can have a fulfilling life and actually serve our people, is to pursue public service. So I really hope that with this campaign, it's just a start of something much bigger, where politics is not just about the extremism and the polarization, but it's about people who are from a community and who grew up somewhere actually coming and finding moderate, common sense solutions to improve everyone's lives. So that's what I'm fighting for, and I hope you join me, and I hope you consider voting for me. Starting today, early voting is from today until November 1st, and of course on election day as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here with us today and taking out the time to answer our questions and the constituents' questions. We wish you luck in your race, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Okay, and our final question that we have from our audience is there one key issue driving you to run for office, and why?
It's people's rights, I would say. I see the erosion of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, rights across the board. And so also as an immigrant, I look at, the ideal of America. It is one that rights are protected and that our justice system works. Two, that we have the ability to have socioeconomic mobility. And that is actually also being threatened in Georgia. We know that Atlanta ranks towards the bottom of being able to move from one socioeconomic class to the other. They always say, if you come to the U.S., if you work hard enough, you can achieve it. That's not so much of a reality these days. So protecting people's rights and making sure that we have that socioeconomic mobility are two of the things that I want to focus on.
All right, thank you. And we'd also like to give you the opportunity to share any final thoughts that you'd like to with the constituents.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. For me, it is, I just talked about rights. I talked about socioeconomic mobility. The Republicans have been in power in this state for 20 years. They have had a trifecta. They have had the House, the Senate, and the governor's office for 20 years. We still have the number one cause of death of children is guns. Our healthcare is in a crisis, as we've discussed today. The current Republican Party is doing nothing to address these issues, especially for marginalized communities. It is time for us to make a change. Right now, we have 78 Democrats in the House. We'll probably get 2 more that are a sure thing. And we have 3 seats that are swing districts right now. Mine is one of those. If we get these 3, we will have a total of 83 Democrats in the House, which is getting us closer to having a majority. So many of these issues, if we want to make progress, we need to have Democrats. We need to have a majority of Democrats in at least one of the chambers. So I encourage you to continue to engage, get out and vote. I'm available. Please go to my website. I read all the emails if you fill out our contact form. But thank you so much for your time, and let's all of us work together to make sure that we can get Georgia on a better path for all.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for being here to address the constituents' questions and our questions as well, and taking the time out, and also for running for office. It takes a lot of guts and skill and, to be able, and dedication to want to represent the constituents in office. I do want to let everyone know these 2 candidates were not opponents. They were not running against each other. They're running for 2 separate positions. So we did invite their opponents. We invited Senator Sean Still and Representative Scott Hilton. Both have declined. We are a nonpartisan organization. We must invite both, and we have done that. We are very excited. And both of those are Republican candidates as well. So when we invited both of them, as we are legally obligated to do, we thank you for committing the time to be here, and candidate Rammaswami as well, to prioritize being here to answer these questions. And we also want to thank you, Dr. Therese, and the ladies of distinction for joining in with us today to host tonight's forum. We will have another forum next week with 2 other candidates. So please make sure that you tune in, you spread the word, you let everyone know. And like I spoke about in the beginning of our session, if you missed it, we do have 2 events coming up. Saturday, October 26th is our 2K walk. It's called our 2K walk to the polls. You can also do, you bring your car, because we will have a motorcade as well. And we will be giving out a cash prize for the best decorated motorcade. And they have to be nonpartisan messages as well. And that will be Saturday, October 26th at 11 a.m. In combination and starting the event at New Jerusalem Baptist Church. And then the next day, we are having our Souls to the Poll, Get Out the Vote party. We're going to have some fun together. We'll have music, we'll have food, and that is from 1 to 6 at George Pierce Park. And please follow our social media accounts and join our email list. That way you can stay updated and become an NAACP member. We have lots of committees for you to join. There's lots of work to do, and we need more bodies to get involved. Again, I am Shaniqua Levin. I am the secretary for your Gwinnett NAACP chapter. And on behalf of President Edward Paul, we thank you all for tuning in and thank you all for participating. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you for what you do. Thank you.
Thank you.